Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to this week's post-cabinet media conference. I am here today to address two situations, really. The first situation was what was reported in the newspapers yesterday, and in particular, I believe it was on page 5 of the Express, where it was a quotation of Mr. Devant Maharaj and his proclamation of victory in a certain freedom of information application to the court. And in particular, the only area I'd like to address, because I believe Minister Stuart Young had a press conference yesterday where he addressed a number of other factual issues, is where once again we're seeing the attempt, well, not attempt, because it was then republished by Mr. Devant Maharaj to mislead the population of Trinidad and Tobago. You see, they have a narrative, they meaning the opposition, and one of their narratives with respect to the government is that the government is hiding stuff, and the government is not being transparent, and the government is not prepared to present and to provide information, which, as members of the media, I'm sure you all are completely aware is false. So in that, because he can't help himself, Mr. Maharaj went on to say that the government, and in particular the Prime Minister, has failed to present 3 reports in particular. The Christian Mute report, which you all would recall, Cabinet had appointed Mr. Christian Mute to look into the whole procurement of the Cabo Star and the Ocean Flower, based on whistleblowers' communication to the Prime Minister of alleged corruption, and you all will recall, and I'll come to the facts surrounding that. So there was a Christian Mute report, a report done with respect to former Minister Darrell Smith, and then a report done by Ambassador Christopher Thomas into the whole vote by the Trinidad and Tobago delegation at an OAS meeting. The suggestion frontally, or the statement rather, was that these 3 reports have not been released to the public. And I was quite disturbed to see that there was no fact-finding. In fact, it is very important, I'd like to suggest, that when we're reporting things and we're providing information, including myself as the Minister of Communication or anyone who's providing information to the public, that we just do some quick fact-finding first to make sure what we're provided with is accurate information, or if what we're provided with that is not accurate information, you can then juxtapose with the accurate facts and information, because that's what the public deserves. The Christian Mute report, you all would recall that for the first time in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, a sitting Prime Minister went to a joint select committee of Parliament on that occasion, that is Prime Minister Dr. Rowley, and presented himself to the Parliament and opened himself up to questioning, and he interacted and interfaced with that parliamentary committee. And what you all would recall is that the Prime Minister appeared at that specific committee of the Parliament on September 18th, 2017. The 86-page Mute report and a compendium comprised of 4 volumes were then sent by the Prime Minister to that specific committee the day after, on the 19th of September 2017. And while some members of the committee argued against the use of the report, it was nevertheless referred to in that Joint Select Committee report, which was then laid in the House of Representatives on the 26th of September 2018 and in the Senate on the 28th of September 2018. The Joint Select Committee's report is available via the Parliament's website, and it makes reference to the report. And that Mute report is accessible via the parliamentary website. So not only was it presented to the public by the Prime Minister, not only did he then send a copy of the report with all of the annexures, 4 volumes of annexures the following day, not only did that committee refer to it in their report, but it has been available to the public on the parliamentary website, and the media has referred to it throughout the course after that report was published. In fact, on the last occasion, I needed to get access to the report. I accessed it via the parliamentary website. So it is completely false, misleading, and part of a wider narrative by the opposition to mislead the public of Trinidad and Tobago to say that the Christian Mute report has never been made public. The next report that I'd like to deal with is the Thomas report. Following an undertaking made in the House by the Prime Minister on the 9th of November 2018, the Permanent Secretary to the Prime Minister sent a copy of the Thomas report to the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament via letter on the 13th of November 2018, addressed to the Clerk of the House. This letter and report were immediately transmitted to the Foreign Affairs Committee, which commenced its inquiry. The Foreign Affairs Committee has since reported. Its report is public, can be accessed on the Parliament's website, and the Thomas report is appended as an annexure to the committee's report. So again, it is completely false, misleading, and a downright lie of the UNC opposition to suggest to the public of Trinidad and Tobago that the Ambassador Christopher Thomas report has not been made public. With respect to the Darrell Smith report, there was produced a draft of a Darrell Smith report that the Attorney General then sought legal advice with respect to the report, and in particular how the report was compiled. There were some procedural issues in the compilation of the report. Mr. Smith and other persons who were named in the report are affected by those procedural issues. The Attorney General sought the advice of external counsel, and that is currently under review. And as a cabinet, we follow the advice of the Attorney General, and in particular when he gets advice with respect to legal matters that are before us. So at this stage, there can be no publication of that report because it is currently under legal advice with procedural issues, and those, if it were published, there would be very detrimental effects due to the nature of the procedures and issues. So this is the first matter that I would like to deal with here today. And just to remind persons that it is the plan, it is the narrative, unfortunate as it is, of the opposition, probably continuing from the Cambridge Analytics days. That is how they sell their product. Just continue to mislead, tell a lie, over and over, and the opposition hopes that the public will then hold on to it. So it is completely false, misleading, and a downright lie to suggest that the government, and in particular the Prime Minister, did not make available those three reports that I've just dealt with. Two, as I've given you all the chronological order when they were put into the public domain, and the third, I've just explained the legal reasons why, the report could not be made public up to this stage. The second issue I'd like to deal with is the issue of Venezuela. Venezuela has become very topical in the last 24 hours, more so than it has been over the past few months. I have come here today to reiterate the government's position, and this has been the government's position from day one. The government's position when it comes to matters of foreign policy is we will not intervene, nor will we interfere with what is going on internally in other sovereign states. The world would recognize, as would all of our citizens, that Venezuela stands 7 miles off the coast of Trinidad. In fact, on a clear day, you can actually see the coastline of Venezuela. Therefore, whatever is going on in Venezuela is bound to affect us here in Trinidad and Tobago. The government's position of non-interference and non-intervention is a very carefully thought out position, as you would respect. We do not see it as being appropriate for us as a government, us as a people, to get involved in the internal politics and policies of what are going on with our neighbors. This is not something that is new. It was the same thing back in, I believe it was the 60s with the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba, in the 80s with what went on in Grenada, and some of these are the other nearby neighboring states. It is also, generally speaking, CARICOM's position on foreign policy of non-intervention and non-interference. This does not mean that we as a government are not concerned about what is going on in Venezuela. How we react to our concern is what is different. We have been invited on many occasions to join interventionist type excursions, and we are not prepared to do so. At the end of the day, we observe what is going on. We're quite concerned about what goes on. We want things to end peacefully. But we do have relations with the Venezuelan people. And those relations go beyond the government. And as I say, we respect the sovereignty of Venezuela and our other neighbors. On a CARICOM position, Trinidad has always held the position with CARICOM, with our other CARICOM sister country, Guyana, when they have had their disputes with Venezuela. Recently, with what went on with the Venezuelan Navy and or a boat in the service industry of oil and gas, where it was alleged that they were in Guyanese waters, etc. Again, we are not in a position to be able, and nor would we want to adjudicate on that matter, but we've always made our position clear at the CARICOM level that we support things being done through a proper process, a proper procedure, and there are various tribunals and arbitrators to decide these boundary disputes, etc. So it really is to come here today and to reinforce our position that we are quite concerned about what goes on, but we are not going to play any interventionist role, nor would we take any such basket. We continue to respect the sovereignty. At the end of the day, the Venezuelan people will decide. And it dawned on me, because of my legal background, that all of these questions being asked and all that we've seen taking place in the last 24 hours, I ask all of the commentators, local commentators that is, which of you have taken the time to go and read the constitution that governs the Venezuelan people? Because that, first and foremostly, is the document that the Venezuelan people use to govern themselves. And that is the law of the land that governs it. And I'm willing to hedge quite a large wager that none, or very, very few, maybe 0.1%, have actually taken the time to go and look at the Constitution of Venezuela and to look at the law that governs Venezuela to determine what takes place in these circumstances. We, as a government, and as the representatives of Trinidad and Tobago, encourage dialogue. We encourage people to talk and to work out their differences as best as they can, and that we hold out that CARICOM and Trinidad and Tobago have always held ourselves available to act as any mediator or to act in any position that may bring a people to carry out productive dialogue, etc. That is the role that we've prepared to play. I can also tell you all that the Prime Minister himself has had several of these types of conversations with other leaders around the world. For example, when we were on the state visit to Chile last year or the year before, I can't remember exactly when, and we were meeting with the Prime Minister, who was meeting and leading a delegation, meeting with the outgoing President of Chile, Ms. Bacheron. He raised it frontally, what was going on in Venezuela. We have excellent relations with Chile. Chile is recognized as one of the leaders of Latin and South America, and the Prime Minister at that stage raised it with the President of Chile that we should try to bring some sort of mediation or hold ourselves available. He even offered Trinidad and Tobago as a meeting place for any discussions that can take place with those who are on opposing sides in Venezuela. He held out that Trinidad and Tobago is quite prepared to play a leadership role in that, or whatever role it's called upon, including hosting any such discussions. So it continues to be our position that we encourage productive dialogue, and that CARICOM and Trinidad and Tobago should maintain their non-interference and non-intervention position. We also call for calm, for whatever it is worth, in Venezuela, and that people try to work things out via dialogue rather than via interference. The Prime Minister also, in a recent CARICOM meeting, I believe it was in Jamaica, heads of CARICOM meeting, used the opportunity to have a very long conversation with the current president of Chile. Again, one of the issues that he raised with the president of Chile at the time was the issue of Venezuela and what can be done by Chile and other leading states in the world to see if any resolve could be brought to this situation. He has also been speaking to other regional governments and leaders within recent times with respect to the issues in Venezuela. We continue to decline any invitations for any hardline intervention or hardline solutions. And we continue to hope for calm and hope that things will be resolved in Venezuela, our neighbor, and we continue to hold neighborly relations with Venezuela as we've done throughout the history of Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. That's what I have to say for now. I'll take some questions. Yes,
One, has the Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, had any communication with President Maduro since this development has occurred in Venezuela?
not as far as I'm aware.
Secondly, any concerns about any increase or further increase in persons from Venezuela finding themselves here in Trinidad and Tobago? Of course, there is the issue of immigration. Some see it as a crisis. Could we see this causing a further increase of Venezuelan nationals arriving in Trinidad and Tobago?
Once again, let me use the opportunity to say there is no crisis. Right? There's a certain individual who makes a lot of noise that likes to keep screaming there's an immigration crisis. He has absolutely no expertise, and whoever is saying there's an immigration crisis, that's not true. Do we have an immigration issue? As I've said before, the answer is yes. To answer your question, yes, one can expect that as things develop in Venezuela, and in particular is if they develop in a manner that is not one of calm and persons returning to fairly normal lives, we being one of the neighboring countries to Venezuela can expect there to be an influx of immigrants. I have, as the Minister of National Security, been having that conversation with the heads of security. This morning, I did send a message to the Chief of Defense Staff before coming into Cabinet. As you all are aware, we had taken a decision to upgrade and to get seaworthy a number of our interceptors, 14 interceptors, and they are going to play an increasing role. I would like to thank the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the immigration authorities. They have increased their presence, in particular the Coast Guard offshore, the TTPS onshore. As I said yesterday, we have had a lot more intelligence-driven operations. I've asked in my conversations with the CDS over the last week, said let's have a lot more data-driven and intelligence-driven operations, and those have been meeting with success. So the borders have been made less porous. I want them even further secured, and that is taking place. I had a conversation yesterday with the acting Chief Immigration Officer, and I'm going to be holding a meeting specifically in the next week about increasing our border security. Work is also going to be done on the legal ports of entry to harden up our borders as we go forward.
The third point, Minister, the gas deal, the across-the-border gas deal. You yourself and the Prime Minister were very much involved in the talks. There's been this question of whether the National Assembly in Venezuela needs to approve it or not. You have the president of that assembly declaring himself interim president, triggering this issue. Could you give any sense of what could happen here with this deal, this gas deal?
First of all, let me say that contrary to what people may think, when we were negotiating the whole contractual arrangement, obviously we sought and obtained legal advice with respect to that. You have to understand that these gas deals, when we're doing them, they're very sophisticated and complex deals and transactions. We also have Shell, which is one of the largest IOCs, international oil companies in the world, being part of the arrangement. So it would be foolish for anyone to believe that we did not seek legal advice, that we did not get lawyers' opinions on what we're doing. I'd also use this opportunity to point out once again, and the Prime Minister himself has alluded to it before, you have not heard any noise from the people of Venezuela, and in particular the opposition of Venezuela, with respect to this transaction. One person came across. We have our suspicions on how he was invited here, who facilitated him here, who linked him with the elements of the media here. But apart from that sole voice, and as you would see, Venezuela is a very big place. The National Assembly is a very populated place, and there has been no noise with respect to it. Let's not call anything unnecessarily upon ourselves. It continues to progress. At the end of the day, it is with the people of Trinidad and Tobago and the people of Venezuela. So it's the government of Venezuela, the government of Trinidad and Tobago that have entered into this transaction. And we would hope that regardless of who is there, it will continue. The same way in Trinidad, when there's a change of administration, and once it's a proper contract, it continues, we expect that to be the case.
I've heard your consistent statements about Trinidad and Tobago not interfering and so on. But today, for example, Bloomberg is reporting that Trinidad and Tobago is one of the countries supporting Maduro. And I think that for the perception, people looking on and analyzing what is happening, is that we are on the side of the Maduro government, whereas the United States and others. So that sitting on the fence, I don't know if it's I don't want to say if it's an option, or if it is that it will not be interpreted as Trinidad and Tobago taking a very neutral position. Are you all afraid that in all of this we will be lumped with countries like Cuba, Bolivia, and that are actually supporting?
I can't help people in their interpretations. I don't know who Bloomberg is personally. Obviously, we know that Bloomberg is amongst other things, they have media involved. I think the question needs to be, asked of Bloomberg, how they come to that conclusion. One of the measuring factors I would have thought is you look at recent international votes. And there was a recent vote, I think at the OAS, and Trinidad abstained, and you quite rightly point, you call that sitting on the fence, as opposed to one side or the other. So I don't know how they can come to that conclusion, whereas on the international forum, where you call upon to cast a vote, Trinidad and Tobago under this administration has been very consistent with how we exercise opposition. I can't help Bloomberg on how they decide to interpret. I don't know how they came to that. Well, no, what we expect is, as I've said here consistently, as the Prime Minister has said consistently throughout, when asked over the last 3 years what opposition is with Venezuela, over the last 2 years, over the last year, over the last few months, over the last few weeks, we have consistently said, I've come here and I've repeated it, I said the same thing at a press conference yesterday, our position is one of non-intervention, non-interference. Everybody in the diplomatic world understands what that clear language means. Well, I know so.
Yeah. Julian, here's some music. Would it not be reasonable for someone looking from outside, seeing Minister Moses attending the inauguration of Maduro as government supporting the Maduro government?
You would recall a few minutes ago I asked a question. Has anybody here read the Constitution of Venezuela? The answer is obviously no. So when you read the Constitution of Venezuela, you get an understanding of what that Constitution allows. I am not the constitutional expert in Venezuela, but you get an understanding of what it allows. I'll repeat it again. Venezuela is one of our closest neighbors. In fact, it is our closest neighbor, 7 miles. There's no other sovereign country 7 miles off the coast of Trinidad and Tobago. There was an invitation extended. The Minister of Foreign Affairs attended the inauguration of President Maduro, and that is all that it was.
So his attendance was not a show of support for the Maduro government?
Well, I think his attendance was a show of support at his inauguration, yes. I'm not going to bury my head in the sand and pretend there was anything otherwise than that.
as my colleague was mentioning, we have someone calling themselves interim president. Does the TT government, who does the TT government recognize as the president of Venezuela at this point?
Who does the TT government recognize as the president of Venezuela at this point?
Constitution of Venezuela.
Well, we have. Well, I think it's a reasonable question. We have other
President
countries.
Maduro.
President Maduro. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Concerns up to this morning about in sort of sitting on the fence, Trinidad and Tobago may be risking endangering the relations we have with the U.S. in many, many areas, from security to trade and so forth.
Absolutely not. I started off my day-to-day meeting with the delegation, including a general, I think 2 generals, from the Delaware National Guard. We continue to be in correspondence with the United States of America. At the end of the day, and this is what I think the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago should actually feel proud about, this administration believes Trinidad and Tobago is a sovereign state. We will uphold Trinidad and Tobago's sovereignty. We will protect our sovereignty. And part of being a sovereign state is you make your own decisions for yourself. And that is what we continue to do as an administration.
Minister, afternoon, Urbashi from CNC3. The
Afternoon.
Caribbean and Latin America is recognized as a peace zone, and there's talks now. I mean, we're seeing the Russian government warning the U.S. against invading Venezuela. I think citizens are wondering what happens to Trinidad and Tobago geopolitically if, let's just say, that does happen. Where do we then align ourselves?
Exactly where we are now. If you have you seen the size of Russia? Have you seen the size of the United States of America? Have you seen the size of Trinidad and Tobago? We will stay non-interventionist and non-interference.
If the U.S. or Trinidad and Tobago's largest trading partner, the Trump administration in charge of the United States, says they plan to take a hardline approach, they would like the support of Trinidad and Tobago in whatever form, this administration would say what's it?
As I've indicated previously, Trinidad and Tobago is a sovereign state. As I've indicated previously, when we've been asked to intervene, we've declined. We will continue to protect the sovereignty of Trinidad and Tobago. Understand times change. Understand it's impossible to predict anything. I've also stood here on many occasions and said I'm not going to speculate. You're asking me to speculate. I can only talk about what is the current position and what I expect our position to continue to be, i.e. one of non-intervention and non-interference. At the end of the day, there's an international organization you have to be a member of that can get involved in certain situations called the United Nations. We are a very active member of the United Nations. We're very well respected at the United Nations, and let's see how this continues to unfold.
Chile earlier. The Latin group has expressed support for Mr. Guaido, and basically Chile and a number of countries in the Latin group. And eventually Dr. Rowley had conversations with the Chilean head before. How does that impact on the perspective? Because they have, but they've not.
It doesn't impact whatsoever. I'm going to repeat again. We are a sovereign state. Chile is a sovereign state. I assume you're talking about the Lima group, which is a group that formed itself as Lima group, and is Peru and a number of other countries. Every sovereign state is entitled to take whatever position it is they decide to take. I had somebody mention a short while ago about Mexico. Mexico has gone on the other, and they've said, look, we don't recognize, etc., etc. At the end of the day, every country needs to take its own decision. At the end of the day, I don't think you all are understanding the point that when you're 7 miles off the coast of a country, how close that is. So it's very easy for somebody to sit on the other side of the Atlantic, take certain decisions, somebody to sit somewhere up north, take certain decisions. Our position is, and I repeat it for the last time, I hope, and continues to be, one of non-intervention and non-interference, which is the best thing right now for the Trinidad and Tobago.
That TNT can be made available to act as mediator. I assume you're talking peace talks.
Absolutely.
Tell me more about this. Do you have a deadline to it? Who are you engaging to? When will you send out this SOS?
Send out what SOS? You don't send out an SOS as a mediator. Mediator is someone who says, look, I'm available. The first thing you understand about mediation is the parties need to want to talk. we have continuously said, I'm saying it now to you, I assume you all will report it. I've said it yesterday, we've said it before. Trinidad and Tobago holds itself available to assist in whatever way, to resolve whatever way the Venezuelan people want to resolve it through any such discussions. We would hold ourselves available, we can host it, etc., etc. At the end of the day, that is up to the Venezuelan people. You are asking us questions that are questions that need to be directed to the Venezuelan people. The government of Trinidad and Tobago has no say in the affairs of Venezuela.
That's the question that I think you should be able to answer, Minister, which is the issue of CARICOM. Do you think this matter is deserving of some sort of special meeting of CARICOM head leaders to discuss the way forward in this matter?
At the end of the day, again, that is a measure and a decision for CARICOM. We are closely affected. I would be very surprised if in some of our other CARICOM islands this type of discussion is taking place, because it's not on their doorstep. They're not affected. What was interesting is you see the news reports out of Jamaica and the position. They took a position, and now the government of Jamaica was being brought under some pressure by the people of Jamaica, which is completely opposite to what we're seeing here, and saying, well, why did you go and say what you said about the government of Venezuela? We shouldn't interfere and we shouldn't intervene in another person's country.
You mentioned that this country has been asked to make interventions. I don't know to say from which body, from which country, and what type of interventions?
Again, in the world of foreign affairs, in the world of international relations, there are constantly lobbies taking place. So there's a vote to take place at the OAS. You will have persons, countries, bodies lobbying you how to vote. There's a vote to take place at the, well, in this case, at the OAS, because that is the body that's been dealing with the situation in Venezuela over the past couple of years. And then you may have other governments that say, look, you know, we are thinking of doing X, Y, and Z. What is your position on it? And again, our position continues to be exactly what I've articulated, and I'm not repeating.
Why, how come Minister Moses isn't articulating the country's position?
I'm the Minister of Communications.
He's the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Exactly.
This one is the line minister in charge of matters of
This
foreign
is under
affairs.
his portfolio.
The cabinet decided that as Minister of Communications, I should come here and engage you all and discuss this topic.
Was TNT's position of non-interference expressed to the meeting this morning with the Delaware officials that you mentioned?
No.
You want to share some details of that meeting?
The Delaware National Guard paid a courtesy visit to me here this morning. What they are here about and what I asked them to assist us with is natural disaster preparedness. We are constantly working. Last week I spent a few days in London with the Commissioner of Police, the Chief of Defence Staff, working with the British authorities, had a meeting with the same people from London. They flew down to Trinidad to conduct some training here yesterday. I met with them yesterday before my meeting with Team Nightingale. And it's just to continue trying to build capacity. So my meeting this morning with the National Delaware Guard was to ask them for help in getting us prepared and working along with our disaster management units for preparedness for any natural disaster that may take place. Also to ask them for assistance with the youth and youth programs like MyLAT and CCC, etc. going forward, because I believe that those programs play a very important role in forming and shaping our society. No mention of Venezuela.
Has the government sought expert advice? I mean, you talked about the Christopher Thomas report there, just now. Have they sought advice from people like Christopher Thomas or Reginald Dumas, people who have had a long history in diplomatic relations, to try to, you know, reach its position or to get some sort of...
reach what position?
Well, in reaching its position on Venezuela, did it seek any kind of expert advice as to what role we should play and what position we should take?
Trinidad and Tobago's position has always been, as far as I am aware, one of non-intervention and non-interference. I'm really struggling to understand what is it exactly that is expected. What is it that else is it that is being asked? What are the other options available to Trinidad and Tobago in our particular circumstances? I am sure the Prime Minister who has over 30 years of public life experience and has seen a lot in cabinets and in opposition, etc. I mean, he's related stories to us about, what has taken place in the past, etc. He consults very frequently. So I don't know. The Prime Minister may consult people, he may discuss things with people, etc. But quite frankly, this is a clear position, and it is a logical position, and it makes complete sense, because I don't understand what it is you all expect us to do other than to take a position of non-interference and non-intervention.
Let me the other issue you spoke about, which were statements made by Mr. Maharaj and so on, and the narrative, you say that the opposition is trying to get the government to be seen as being secretive and so on. Why then did the court not provide the documentation if it is that, you're aware of the narrative?
Okay, I am not quite familiar with what his Freedom of Information request was. You're reminding me of another point. I saw it being sold by the opposition that this was some great success in getting tender documents with respect to the Galleon's passage. Completely false. The tender process was one that was discontinued, is my understanding. I don't know, because I did not see the legal pleadings. I don't know what it is the lawyers argued, what were the positions taken. But from a policy position, you can't, it seems to me to be against public policy that every time there's a tender, someone then rushes to get, under Freedom of Information, provide me with all of the documents, what was exchanged in the tender, etc. These tenders are conducted in a certain way. Information is kept confidential until certain stages, etc. But I am not going to speculate. Those questions are best directed to the Minister of Works and Transport. But I did see him on television last night, I believe, saying that despite the lawyer's advice to appeal the matter, because it is very appealable, they're not going to, and he's going to provide the documents. I don't even know what are the documents that were requested.
Certainly, they have to, having all these said about all these things about public policy, you still have to give them the document, because
but as I say, I don't know what are the documents that were requested.
Minister, as we were on the topic of Mr. Maharaj, I spoke with MP David Lee, and he has said that Mr. Maharaj he's not on the executive of the UNC. He's not an MP. He's not a senator. So saying that he speaks for himself. But I know the government.
That's not true.
Well, I'm going to ask you, how do you respond to that position that he speaks for himself and he does not represent the opposition?
He is a member of the opposition. He speaks for the opposition.
Even though he does not hold any position within the opposition?
I don't hold any position within the PNM executive.
Not PR anymore?
No.
You're changing people.
Minister, back to the peace talks. Now, just putting it out there, I have no foreign affairs training, so I don't know how this thing works. But I don't think it's fair to just throw out TNT is willing to act as mediator and just leave it there. If you would kindly explain to me how this thing works.
How does what work?
How do you act as mediator? Don't you engage both parties to try to get them to...
Do you understand what non-intervention means? Do you understand what non-interference means? It means you don't interfere. It means you don't intervene. What you do is you've said, listen, I am available. As I said a short while ago, for something like mediation to work, the first thing that needs to happen is both parties need to want to talk to try and find a solution. That is certainly not for Trinidad and Tobago to do. All we can do is what we've done. We hold ourselves available with whatever resources we have in terms of location, etc., etc. There are, you know about President Jimmy Carter. He's a very old US president, but he has become renowned over years. I think he's now in his 90s or his late 80s for acting as an international peace mediator, and he's done it consistently. But the first thing you need is for the parties to say, we want to sit with a mediator and try and resolve our problems. So all we can do as a nation is say, listen, we're here, we're available. However, we could help to resolve a matter that is happening internally. If you want, we hold ourselves available. It's as simple as that.
Reach to the Venezuelans in any form when that was discussed by CARICOM?
What you mean if
that
it's reached
offer,
in
you know, having mediation talks, peace talks, willingness.
This has been discussed at various.
As far as into the inner sanctum of
I
Venezuela.
don't know if it has reached as far as. No, as I just said, the Prime Minister raised this, for example, directly with the President of Chile, 2 presidents of Chile, etc. I know it was raised with Canada and these types of places. So at the end of the day, you hold yourself out available. You don't, it's not for us to write. So if the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition are having a difference of views, etc., I wouldn't expect the Prime Minister of another CARICOM country to write to say, hey, listen, I will get involved in your affairs and help you and the leader of the opposition to sort things out. Look at what's going on in Guyana right now. I'd be completely stunned and surprised if any other CARICOM country has written to Guyana to say, hey, we can come and intervene and work things out. What they may say is, listen, if you all need a place that you want to get away and talk, etc., we hold ourselves available.
So you were speaking about shoring up the borders, and I presume you're talking about dealing with illegal immigration and legal immigration as well too. What about with a possible influx of Venezuelans and a possible influx of refugees and asylum seekers? Are we going to see some type of fast tracking, some urgency with the policy measures?
As I say, I was away last week. I saw some conversation taking place in the public space and the Attorney General making certain comments. And I believe it was the Minister Dillon as well, and it may have been Parliament. Now I'm trying to remember what I was reading while this was away, saying that the mandate on the policy side has been passed over to the Attorney General and Legal Affairs. So I will have to follow up on that conversation. My position as the Minister of National Security is we need to engage with all of the stakeholders. From a legal perspective, as you all know, unfortunately, we don't have the domestic legislation keeping it in place. So we need to really finalize the policy and deal with it. But having said that, you would recognize as citizens, it is something you need to balance very, very carefully. Because at the end of the day, our responsibility first and foremostly are to our citizens, and we have to be able to provide for our citizens. But we certainly, I don't think we're not going to turn people away and allow them to live in harsh and inhumane circumstances in Trinidad and Tobago if we can afford it.
We see a lot of Venezuelan neighboring countries battling with the same influx of refugees. But I get your point about the securing of the borders, but as of now, do we have a count on the number of Venezuelans here, and do we know how many we can actually support or we are prepared to have here? And what happens then? Because, you know, Venezuelans anybody could come from any country legally and just not go back, you know?
If you go to a country, for example, United States, and they stamp in your passport that you have a certain amount of time, you can be here legally, etc. When it passes that time, what do you expect the United States authorities to do? To do what?
Follow up on you, find you, and deport you.
They will deport you because you're now there illegally, etc. Correct, if they find you, etc. Those are the same laws that apply in Trinidad and Tobago.
Exercises ongoing. Do we look
constantly, as you would see, I mean, in the immigration detention center, etc. So very often when illegal immigrants are picked up, there is a process under the immigration law. There are various options, etc. So yes, it is exercised.
Are there any numbers?
I don't. You asked a number of questions with respect to numbers. One of the last questions was, given by the United Nations, the official amount is 40,000. You asked how many Venezuelans are here in Trinidad and Tobago. I don't have those numbers in front. I think it was 40,000 Venezuelan immigrants in Trinidad.
Minister, how many are we
One at a time.
How
Just
many?
let's give Ms.
It was part of
Alexander
my
a chance.
question. How many are we prepared to accommodate?
Well, that's an impossible question to answer. How many people you're prepared to accommodate is an impossible question to answer. I don't think you can have a policy that we're going to take 20 Venezuelans and when the 21st one comes, you stop them. I've certainly never seen such a policy anywhere in the world, but I stand to be corrected. So we're not there.
Economically, we can't just,
And
continue.
I'm glad you recognize that.
Two security questions. This is Felicia Perkins Ferrero. Any ETA for when it are supposed to arrive?
I did not, we don't have our phones in cabinet. We were expecting them to come on the flight this afternoon. I have not as yet been able to check to see if they are in fact on the flight coming in this afternoon.
And the 16-year-old guy from Trinidad who was arrested for being a member of ISIS, that was a couple of months back. Any update on that? Any sort
We
of
have not been
detail?
officially informed. I mean, I've seen the same thing I assume you all have seen. The first report actually had reported him as an American citizen, and then I saw a subsequent report saying no, he's actually a Trinidadian himself, and I believe his mother. But we have not been provided, as far as I am aware, but I as I say, I was out last week with any official information, but it hasn't been brought to my attention as yet.
Are they going to follow up on all these other matters?
The Nightingale team, yes, and they're subsects of the Nightingale team. So the Nightingale team, as you would have seen, comprises the Child Protection Unit, the Children's Authority. So that was set up, those parts are set up to deal with minors. God forbid we have foreign terrorists, active foreign terrorist fighters who are going to come back. We have another team to deal with that and how those types of cases will be dealt with. But the point is, despite what I'm seeing suggested by those who don't know, and in particular persons outside of Trinidad and Tobago, this is something we have been dealing with, and we deal with very quietly and very efficiently.
Basically, we are following up on the cases regarding minors at this point.
What cases, plural, regarding minors?
Who you've been investigating since August?
It was the Ferreira brothers. That was the one that was on the front burner, and that's the one that's being dealt with.
Oh, why is it that everything has to be done quietly? This story was in the media for about 3 weeks, and it was only when the same person you were talking about managed to get them to London or whatever that the government came forward and said, oh, we have been working on this for however long and so on. That sometimes creates a credibility problem, because people feel that why didn't we hear about this until after somebody else did the job that
Did what job? It's not a government. It's not the government's responsibility to repatriate persons. To do what?
People caught, young children
Okay,
caught
first
in a
of
war,
all,
in a
First of all, as I said extensively yesterday, part of the process is you have to do investigation, etc. These people had resources on the ground there. We did what we could from Trinidad. We had even looked at the possibility of flying our own personnel out there. But as you would, or you should rather, understand, these are dangerous places. They're conflict zones. They are literally war zones. So you have to take decisions as to, do I fly my personnel out there into a war zone, a conflict zone, in a situation where we can't provide for their safety and their security? Right? At the end of the day, when it comes to certain issues of national security, you can't talk about it, or you should not talk about it, in particular when you have active investigations taking place. It always affects me when I see people saying things to the media, etc., and I know for a fact it's not true. But in certain instances, I cannot come out and say, well, listen, what you're being told there is untrue, because of the sensitive nature of investigations. You don't want to influence possible prosecutions down the road, etc. Unfortunately, that's just how it is.
Here's something I would like for you to speak about, Minister, in your capacity as National Security Minister. The homicide rate as it stood last year, we've had the national conversation about that. We're seeing the issue of homicides this year. The concern of whether or not is the government, in terms of turning the tide when it comes to that particular crime, what is your sense of what could be expected going forward? In light of all the efforts last year, we did see that figure.
The metric of homicides is something that is used throughout to measure how crime affects persons. I can tell you it is something that is attracting the attention, my attention, on a 24-hour basis as Minister of National Security, and I am working with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the other arms, and they are doing a good job. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has been tackling this. We have a number of initiatives being utilized, the emergency response patrols, etc., etc. It is something on the front burner.
Because as you have mentioned, the efforts of the police service, but then what other factors are there that, as far as you are aware of, that could be contributing to this, despite the efforts of law enforcement?
Contributing to what?
In terms of the rate of homicide, what other...
I have told myself I am not getting into any discussion as a comparison of the rates of homicide. That's kind of like calling sod's law unto yourself. I did see the Commissioner of Police suggest a few weeks ago before we traveled that the homicide rate, I think it was 41% lower this year so far in January compared to last year in January. I know the homicide rate at the end of January 2017 was 60. I hope that we keep it below 60. So far we're quite significantly below 60. And I can assure you, because I know in my constant interaction with the police service, they are doing quite a lot, and quite a lot more than what's being done before, to keep those homicides down. I mean, let's have a frank discussion. At the end of the day, it comes down to the vast majority of these homicides are being committed through the use of illegal firearms. We do have exercises where the police are actively pursuing and looking for intelligence with respect to illegal firearms, etc. And I know they are doing a great job. I am hoping with the introduction of more technology, it would assist us, because to prevent murder is a difficult task, and you won't know how many times you've prevented murder, but you know how many times it has happened. And then that turns to the detection. I've seen the detection rate of crimes go up, which I'm quite pleased about. But again, I know they are doing a lot of work, and we are supporting them as much as we can.
Regarding the earlier subject concerning Venezuela, is something that came to mind. Is there anything, was the government discussed, any scenario that would change the government's position from its more staying on the fence, as it were, to taking a side one way or the other?
Again, you're asking me to speculate. I can't speculate.
Minister, just to get back, I may have missed it, right? While we're talking about, well, I'm calling them the children of war, as they are, the children orphaned in war-torn countries. Are there... Which children orphaned in war-torn countries? Children who have been taken by their parents to fight in wars, and they've been orphaned there. It's their children, many children. I'm just asking if there are any other Trinidad and Tobago citizens, any other children that may be caught up in the same situation.
I don't know what situation you're talking about. If you're talking about the Ferreiras, they're not orphaned, because I think it's reported that their mother has gone and gotten them back, all right? There are other Trinidad and Tobago citizens, unfortunately, who for some reason or the other made their way out there. We've seen reports, and we know that, for example, in Iraq, there's a particular Trinidadian family. We haven't been able to ascertain what happened to the father. They've gone through a trial. The mother and daughter, as far as we are aware, are incarcerated in an Iraqi jail. We're not sure whether the father was executed as a result of a trial or not. There are more of these types of situations. What we're trying to do is work with the international organizations, like, for example, the International Red Cross, that actually have persons on the ground at refugee camps, etc., to get the information from them. And sometimes that is proving to be a lot more difficult than I would hope. Part of all these journeys that I make to Washington and to London, etc., are to open up doors for easier communication, because when people know who you are and you pick up the phone and you call them or you communicate with them, it makes it a bit easier. And to make it easier for Trinidad and Tobago, and in particular law enforcement and intelligence agencies, to get the information to assist. So I think, to answer your question, the answer is yes. There are Trinidad and Tobago nationals out there. As we know, about 130 went out in 2012 to 2014. Not all have perished or returned, etc.
particular, I think there's a special concern over the children.
Yes, and that is why we set up Team Nightingale, because we are concerned about minors and children. You also have to understand, when children return here, we don't know what they've experienced out there. One of the first questions you ask is, unfortunately, one of the methodologies of ISIS and other terrorist organizations is they train young children to become fighters, to use weapons and to kill people. So one of the first things you're trying to ascertain is, did any of this training take place? Right now, I don't have anything active right here in front of me. It is something that is constant. It can change when I leave this room, etc. But what I'm pleased to say is we are aware of it. We have been making the contacts with the international organizations that have more resources than we do, and we are setting up all of the right policies and procedures. We've even requested international assistance. So in one of my conversations with the British government yesterday, they volunteered to get psychologists and experts who deal with children that have returned from war zones to Trinidad to work with our Children's Authority and to train them up so we're better prepared to deal with instances.
Numbers.
No.
So we are going to meet these two children.
You are going?
No, I said,
You said we.
when I said we meaning
To meet the children where?
When they arrive.
when they arrive.
Yes,
you
I
told-
said so yesterday.
Right.
There is a process set up in place. I actually said who's going to be there later. It will be the Children's Authority, the Child Protection Unit, Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. This is not the first time this has happened. I also said that yesterday. Either last year or the year before, we had 9 to 13 nationals, women and children, return from Turkey, where they'd either been captured in Syria or trying to cross the border into Syria. The Turkish authorities brought them back to Trinidad with a number of Turkish officials escorting them here. I met with those Turkish officials, etc., to establish again the conversation with them, to ensure that if this happens again, we know who we're dealing with in Turkey, etc., because it's on the border of Syria and they have an influx of people trying to get in and now more so trying to get out, etc. So we have a procedure in place. We've had others return as well, and I will make the point in ending that one of the things I said yesterday is whenever persons return from these areas, they will be monitored by our security services.
Did you mention anything yesterday concerning any invitation to any member of the Venezuelan government or any visit? Or
What I had said yesterday, and you have to understand, when I went into the press conference yesterday, things were developing, right? So it was members of the media saying, look, this has happened, I hadn't seen it for myself. Prior to that, in my discussions with Minister Moses, we had discussed and I'd asked him, look, let's invite the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Venezuela and the equivalent of the Minister of National Security for Venezuela over here, because I want to have a conversation with them about assisting us in protecting the borders. All right? I'd like to...
now that this development has taken place,
that's
does
the
that
law.
invitation still stand, Minister?
I think we need to just wait and see how things unfold. But yes, I am very interested as a Minister of National Security engaging with the equivalent in Venezuela and the person in charge of the Venezuelan authorities and law enforcement agencies and defense force, etc., in making sure that they play their part and assist us in securing the borders of Trinidad and Tobago.
Question from the Minister. You were mentioning people returning, issues with foreign terrorist fighters. Do we have any numbers of how many return?
Unfortunately not. And I mean, I have been to intelligence agencies all over the world, in Washington, in London, met with law enforcement, etc. It is very, very difficult to get that type of information until something happens. And I saw one of the newspapers report, and let me correct it, that I was suggesting yesterday that Mr. Ferreira may not be dead. As far as we are aware, he died on the battlefield. The person I was referring to as the poster boy for ISIS is Sean Crawford. And we've had at different times our foreign allies tell us they believe he's died, and then they come back and say, okay, we're not able to confirm it. It's very, very difficult. And especially you have to understand they're doing us favors. So they may have their own citizens in their database, etc. They don't have ours. So you could just understand how difficult it is for them to identify persons out on the battlefields, particularly if they're dead. One final question for you, Ms. Tate.
Does the law allow us to debrief and question the children without parental
So what I instructed, and again this is, I saw one of the newspapers reported incorrectly saying I was instructed. I instructed yesterday in my meeting with Team Nightingale, I asked the Children's Authority to go to court this morning to get an assessment order, not a supervision order or anything like that. The first case, let's get the opportunity to assess the children. Because at the end of the day, my first and foremost concern is the safety and welfare of these children. I want these boys to be able to live a normal life if they can. So the Children's Authority, I asked them to go to court and get an order. We will ask the mother for her consent. If she doesn't, I don't know what the court has done. I don't want to get into that. It may still be going on in court, etc. But the law permits us to do an assessment. And I think we need to do an assessment so we can then decide how to take it moving forward. And I've also told the personnel who will be interacting at the airport, if and when it happens, to hold out that the state is here to assist in whatever way we can, in particular with the psychological effects and to provide that support, because it cannot be an easy experience what they've gone through. Okay, thank you all very much.